In the history of cinema, there has rarely been such a perfect instance of casting married to mythic ideas and storytelling simplicity as Universal's 1941 monster classic, The Wolfman. The unique beauty of this film comes into sharp focus considering that there was no set source material to work from, this was Universal's second stab at a werewolf movie, and it came from the height of Universal's B-movie era. There's almost no reason why The Wolfman should have been as good as it was, and yet here we are. Though subsumed today beneath the modern popularity of The Creature, Frankenstein, and Dracula, The Wolfman is, nevertheless, one of the greatest Universal monster movies. Our story begins during the golden age of Universal monsters. Between 1931 release of Dracula and Frankenstein and the 1936 bankruptcy and restructuring of Universal Studios, the company produced a daring series of films in the still nascent genre of horror. For the most part, these works were inspired by existing literature, the works of Bram Stoker, Mary Shelley, Edgar Allan Poe, and H. G. Wells. But a few original ideas would seep in, such as The Mummy and Werewolf of London. Though still an enjoyable enough film in its own right, Werewolf of London was an uneven film. There is no developed mythology for the werewolves, other than a special flower that must be cultivated with Art Deco 1930s sci-fi machinery. What it does say about werewolves is bound in Orientalist tropes and is confused. One of the most glorious moments in the film is when Dr. Harry Glendon has transformed into a ravenous, ferocious beast, but stops to put on his coat and hat before stepping out into the London fog to hunt. Though Henry Hull is an excellent actor, he did not infuse his performance with an overabundance of tortured emotion, conveying the living horror of a man condemned to turn into a beast and destroy the person he loves the most. In fact, his emotional range is so limited that he seems downright unpleasant most of the time anyway, having a strained relationship with his wife, played by the stunning Valerie Hobson. Few viewers actually root for the couple. She has come across like a young, vivacious woman trapped in a marriage of convenience, if not arrangement, with Hull's doctor. The real conflict is between Hull and the man who made him into a werewolf, and it's not developed enough to make it really engaging. Now don't get me wrong, Werewolf of London does have much to recommend it in the context of 1930s Universal films, but it never caught on due to its lack of simplicity. It's scattered too far all over the place, with nothing for the audience to really latch onto at a visceral, emotional level. It's an interesting oddity that is best remembered for producing an eponymous song by Warren Zevon, a song that still references the film that overshadowed Werewolf of London. After the financial disaster of 1936, in which Koss and Showboat ran the company into the ground and delivered it into new ownership, the Universal Monsters series became the stuff of B-movies, mostly about an hour long, cheaply and expediently produced films meant to fill some time and deliver some frights in anticipation of the A-list feature film. Which is not to say that Universal's B-movie era through the 1940s isn't enjoyable, but it rarely produced films on the same caliber as those from the 1930s. The biggest exception was a little film from 1941, Universal's second crack at a werewolf mythology. And this time, they got practically everything right. Where to begin? Well, let's start with the most obvious and the thing that really holds the whole film together. Lon Chaney Jr. as Larry Talbot. While Chaney may seem inappropriate as the son of an English aristocrat, that is easily explained away by his extended sojourn in the United States, learning the skilled trades rather than pursuing the idle life of a wealthy intellectual. Otherwise, it all fits Chaney perfectly. The son of the great Lon Chaney Sr., Crichton, as was his birth name, was always a limited actor. He was a tall, strapping, uncouth lad who specialized in playing tall, strapping, uncouth characters. Sometimes this resulted in less than ideal casting, such as his turn at playing Dracula in Son of Dracula, or limiting him to secondary roles, such as the villainous bayou dweller of 20th century's The Alligator People. But it also landed him two of the best casted roles in movie history. Lenny Small in 1939's Of Mice and Men, and Larry Talbot in 1941's The Wolf Man. Of Mice and Men could be a whole video of its own. It is a spot-on perfect adaptation of John Steinbeck's 1937 novel and stage play. Everyone in it plays their roles to perfection, especially Burgess Meredith as the quick-witted dreamer and schemer George, and Chaney as his developmentally challenged partner and ward Lenny. I don't think either one did a finer dramatic role, even considering The Wolfman, or Meredith's multiple roles on the Twilight Zone TV show. Chaney manages to avoid the pitfall expressed in the film Tropic Thunder, portraying Lenny as simple and clearly troubled, but still fundamentally good-natured and ultimately tragic. When asked about my favorite non-horror films of Hollywood's golden age, my favorite serious or dramatic films, Of Mice and Men is certainly near the top of the list. To have just one role like that would be enough for any actor's posterity. Two is something else entirely. Chaney brings his Midwestern charm and oafish simplicity to the role of Larry Talbot. But more than that, he brings genuine pathos as a man equally bewildered and horrified by what he has become. He is utterly powerless before this monstrous shadow self, unable to stop it and unable to convince anyone else to stop him. Everyone in town is willing to believe he is an unsavory element in their village, a nasty man who lashes out in rage and carouses with betrothed women. But nobody is willing to believe he actually turns into a murderous lupine creature, and that refusal to believe him is maddening enough without the actual madness of lycanthropy to deal with. Lon Chaney Jr. in The Wolfman delivers a tour de force performance equal to Boris Karloff's as the monster and Bela Lugosi's as Dracula. The remainder of the cast is perfectly suited to their roles. Claude Rains is excellent as the father, Sir John Talbot, as are Maria Uspenskaya as the gypsy Maliva and Bela Lugosi, by this time relegated to secondary roles, as the gypsy werewolf named, appropriately, Bela. Uspenskaya is especially indispensable as a compassionate, wise, mysterious figure of quiet reserve, a kind of gypsy Edward Van Sloan. The gypsies are likewise an indispensable part of the film in general, in the construction of its mythology and the potency of its setting. The developed mythology missing from Werewolf of London is fully formed here, courtesy of writer Kurt Siodmak. Almost all of it is made up whole cloth for the movie, but it has the perfect ring of antiquity and mystery. Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night can become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. Wolfsbane, Silver, the Mark of the Beast, which is a part of Siodmak's mythology that hasn't endured, and the gypsies as the marginal peoples on the edge of civilization, who are the most acquainted with the dangerous things that lie beyond. Classical horror movies manifested this contrast between civilization and the unknown in different but parallel ways. In The Mummy, it is manifest more in the characters than in the setting. The mingling of Imhotep and Dr. Mueller among the high society of Cairo, or the mingling of Ankhsenamen and Helen Grosvenor in the same body. In Dracula and King Kong, the unknown lies beyond far-flung exotic lands, Transylvania, and beyond the Indonesian archipelago, respectively. In The Wolfman, it is imagined with stark dualism. The dark, fog-enshrouded forest lies right at the edge of the quaint English village. When fashionable men and women of the 40s enter this dark forest, they seem woefully out of place. Modern interlopers in dangerous realms where they don't belong, meddling in things they know nothing about, against which civilization has insulated them. The stark dualism of the setting reflects the stark dualism in Larry Talbot. Not heeding the gypsy warnings, emblematic of our own bulwark of religious tradition, Larry galumps blindly into the dark forest, and his animalistic subconscious is released in the form of a ravenous werewolf. We too easily and foolishly cast off our traditions as mere superstition, telling ourselves that we are too modern and too rational for antiquated Bronze Age beliefs. That we can be good without religion, just as we might tell ourselves we can walk without bones. Not because we are too smart to need them, but because we are too ignorant to understand what they do. Nevertheless, all these learned men of society are wrong. Larry has learned the hard way that these traditions exist for a reason. His irreverence has turned him into something primal, subconscious, chthonic, and therefore monstrous. Having become thus, Larry cannot go back. His only release is death. But sadly, where there is money to be made, there shall be no rest for the wicked. The tidy end of The Wolfman was undone by Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, where Universal first got the bright idea to give the monster series a jolt by pitting them against each other. Through Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, House of Frankenstein, and House of Dracula, the mythic strength and purity of the Wolfman's concept is reduced to a near one-note performance of tormented Larry seeking out some way to die. Blessedly, he is given a happy ending in House of Dracula, as the post-World War II world of atomic-age scientific progress finds a cure for lycanthropy. The dark, violent, animalistic subconscious of humankind is no longer a moral or spiritual problem, but merely a medical problem. It wouldn't do to lose a classic monster like the Wolfman, though. In his final film, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, Larry is back to form as a man tormented by his eternal curse to come on screen, give some useful piece of exposition, look at the moon mournfully, and turn into a werewolf. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein are the universal monsters distilled into their final, petrified kitsch forms. But returning to the first film, all these themes, which run throughout the Universal Monsters films and classic horror in general, are stripped down to perfection in The Wolfman. Universal's B-movie era of the 1940s produced no other original monster of the Wolfman's caliber. Not the man-made monster, not the mad ghoul, not the captive wild woman. Only the Wolfman was so richly imbued that it joined the ranks of Universal's Magnificent Seven, or even its unholy trinity. It is a film rich in spooky atmosphere and character drama, which all acts, without let or hindrance, to driving home the central theme of the violent, irrational, dark subconscious of humankind unleashed. A timely film in the midst of World War II, and even our own age.